Well, hello, welcome to the video. I just read in Wikipedia that punk rock, and I'm paraphrasing here, the punk rock explosion of 1976 killed off pub rock, which is totally untrue because the pub rock that we know about today, not on this YouTube channel, I would stress, because I was there, I can tell you it's not quite true, is based around the Dave Robinson, fine chap though he is, version of pub rock, which basically stopped when he docked a few hits with Stiff Records, which he founded. And it's pretty much the case that Dave Robinson and Jake Riviera and all the people involved in that side of it didn't create pub rock. They boosted pub rock because, as we know, it's all this stuff about Eggs Over Easy playing at the Tally-Ho pub in Kentish TRown in 1971, previously a jazz pub, blah, blah, blah. Which is partly true, but it's only half the story. There always was pub rock in pubs in London. It might have been Irish music, it might have been a rock band, it might have been a blues band, it might have been just an Irish session where people just get together and play their instruments. All these things were happening before May 1971. But this was a good place to hang your hat. They certainly boosted it all. They got places open that weren't previously known, and they put adverts in the New Musical Express and the Melody Maker and stuff like that. So it became more of a thing, and then it spread, but it didn't end when Ian Jury had a hit or Niccolo did this or whatever. It carried on because most of the stuff in the article in Wikipedia, like they mentioned the George Robey, the Bull and Gate, the Cricketers, all these archetypal pub rock venues, they didn't really start till the 1980s or, well, late 70s, early 80s, because that was when, to me, the major part of pub rock was, because, all right, so people like Dr. Feelgood and Mickey Jupp and people like that had played in the 1970s, and hats off to them. They were very influential and they were great bands. But in the 1980s, there was an explosion because it was all post-punk. There were bands coming down from all over the country to play in London. And there was like indie bands. There were bands coming from Australia like the Triffids and the Go-Betweens and people like that. And it was a very exciting time. And in the 1980s, there's acts from the 60s such as Geno Washington and the Ramsham Band. And Georgie Fame and Steve Marriott and people like that.
Let me walk you home at night. What you gonna do about it?
Played in pubs in the 1980s. They didn't really play in pubs in the 1970s. For various reasons, it wasn't cool to do so. But pioneered by Joe Pearson, I believe, at the Half Moon Putney, who put on acts like Dr. John and Richard Thompson and visiting American artists, it became cool to play in pubs. So in the 1980s at the Cricketers, for example, we had acts like Georgie Fame and the Blue Flames.
The only thing I can say, I say yeah. And that's what I say yeah.
We had George Melly, we had Dr. John, we had Eddie Floyd, we had lots of acts appeared in our pub. And this wouldn't really have happened in the 1970s. And venues like this Sir George Robey, well, that basically started in the very early 1980s. It was doing gigs before then because I went to several gigs when they had punk bands on there and Irish bands playing there in the back room, because at the time it was a back room. And then I think it's about 1981, 1982, Malcolm Rogers, Joe Giltrap, a guy called John Newman, who went on to create all-night sessions in Turnmills in Clerkenwell, and that was the start of the rave scene. And these guys were like enthusiasts. Malcolm and Joe were musicians in a duo called Irish Mist that played on the Irish circuit, but they didn't know much about putting on acts. They brought me in to help them book the bands and things, because obviously back then, no internet, no Google searching, so you had to find the band you wanted by ringing their agents or having the phone numbers of the people. And I had those phone numbers and they didn't, so they got me to help them. That's how the Pogues started their residency on Wednesday nights, I'm told. I thought it was Tuesdays, but everybody tells me it was Wednesdays at the Robey, and it was so popular that the police made us stop because it just people were spilling out on the road. And literally thousands of people were turning up to this because it was a phenomenon. It was the right band in the right place at the right time. Basically, I'd seen the Pogues busking in Hammersmith and I really liked them, and so I put them on a few things. They were already starting to do bigger things, but I sort of accelerated it and I put on on their first big gig for them at the upstairs at the Clarendon Ballroom, which was also hosting Clubfoot, which was John Kurt's thing. It wasn't my thing. So when the Hammersmith Clarendon, which was run by a guy called Brian Peters, whose real name was, I'm not sure of his first name, but his surname was Patel, and he'd come from the Nashville famous music pub. Fullers had given him the Clarendon as a reward when they stopped doing music at the Nashville, and he turned the upstairs into like a major venue. So you're getting all this information. I don't think this is in a lot of the books even. I've got an interesting fact for you. Did you know that 88% of people watching this video are probably not subscribed to my channel? I found that amazing. If you like it, you should subscribe. I really think you should. Hit the like button, and that really helps me. And if you can help me, I'm all for that. Tell you what I'll do. So we do a countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Subscribed. Have you? Thank you so much. If you haven't, well, you know, you're a bit like me. Let's continue with this exploration of the 1980s, which was for me, the biggest period in pub rock, because all the indie bands at the Cricketers, which is by the Oval where I used to do shows, we had a great thing with Annie Ross of Food Records, which I mentioned in a previous video about Diesel Park West. There was also Joe Discs in Chiswick, used to supply me bands, and we knew people. I was also involved in the very early days of alternative comedy. Believe it or not, I was Paul Merton's agent for about a week back in the early 1980s when I was at Wimbledon Theatre running an agent there, and he was called, I can't remember now, he had to change his name to Paul Merton because his name isn't Paul Merton, and he lived in Merton to get into equity, which is what basically I was helping all these people like Norman Lovey, and went on to do Red Dwarf, and I put on shows at the Star and Garter in Putney and those sort of things, and I had Ben Elton, and I had French and Saunders, the Coyote Brothers, which was Rick Mail and Adrian Edmondson, well, Arnold Brown, Linda Smith, Hattie Hayridge, and also other people that you won't have heard of now, like Randolph the Remarkable, who was an actor who would do this act where he would like do weird things like an old style magician who would get dressed up and he would have a large belly, and he would jump into a large tin bathtub belly first, because at the time, I don't know if you know this, people actually had metal baths in their kitchens. Not everybody, because a lot of people had normal baths like we have now. But some people, especially the old terrace houses, didn't have a bath. So they just had a metal bath, which everybody put in front of the fire on a Sunday night, say, because nobody had baths apart from on Sunday nights back then. And showers, only when it rained. Going back to the 80s, so I put people like that in. I put them in, like Mark Steele, I knew him vaguely. I don't know how I knew Mark, but when Mark Steele was starting out, I put him on for a few supports. I would put on Mark Lamar as support. I think it was called Mark Jones then, and he was a poet. And so I'd put them on as support. So this was unheard of before this, because it started off when I was at the Cock in Fulham, which was in the late 1970s, and the Cock is not mentioned anywhere. And basically, it was in the North End Road, and the landlord, his name was Steve Rundle. He used to have a penchant for jazz funk, and he's put on the jazz sluts. Funny about pub landlords, they always have a penchant for jazz funk. I don't know what it is. It seems to go with the lack of sleep and the alcoholism. I don't know. Not for me to say. But I was never a big fan of the jazz funk, so I used to try and get on like rock bands and blues bands and R&B bands, and obviously there were no punk bands then, but some rock bands who were like a bit punky even then. And then we had this thing played there called Alternative Cabaret, which was run by a guy called Tony Allen, who recently died. Yeah, he was the king of the alternative comedians, although he never went off to find fame and fortune. And this is the sort of thing you never get to hear about, because it's not part of the official story. And on that note, because this started off about Wikipedia and about what they were doing and not doing and how they mislead you, you really got to watch stuff like this. I'm not saying I'm the only person doing it, though I haven't seen anyone else travelling down these paths. I'm doing this to try and explain what was really happening. And if you enjoy it, I do appreciate you sticking along, and thank you very much. See you next time. Bye.